Hi, Kate here from Peak Missoula downtown for a nice yin practice that you can do at home. So you'll need or want to have a bolster or a couple of pillows, 2 blocks, or if you don't have blocks, then you could grab some books, something that's going to hold your weight. And then the last is a strap, and if you don't have a strap, then a belt works just fine. Okay, so let's sit up and we'll place our strap close and on this side of the mat. And then with your blocks or books, we're going to open up the chest with a heart bench. And as you come back onto the blocks, the top one for the head and the middle one is for the middle of the back. When you're reclining back onto this block, with the lowest part of the block, right about, you can feel where your floating ribs are, to right down here, just a little bit higher, so that we're not putting pressure on the floating ribs. And not, again, not at the low back, but right in the middle of the back. So it'll feel as if the space right behind the chest is getting a nice lift, and then our bolster, our pillows down at the bottom, and you can kind of monkey around a little bit until you've got your legs supported and the back and the head. So go ahead and recline. Feel free to take the arms wide, wiggle the hips, and look left and right. So as you can see, I'm not in a studio, I'm just in the back room of my house where I've constructed a space for practice and for teaching. And like many of you, what comes along with a home practice are some distractions. And the distractions could be a neighbor or your pets. So if you may notice that my 2 dogs kind of like to help out, I like to call it. They like to be helpful. I'm trying to keep them from barking, but as a home practitioner, that is out of my control. So once you're reclined, just start to maybe roll through the ankles and the wrists. Look left and right. Take your time, perhaps moving the flesh away from the sits bones. So this short half-hour practice could be done in the morning, midday, in the evening. So it's really suitable for any time of day. And so in yin, we hold positions for a longer amount of time. I usually count to about 10 to 15 breaths per pose. So that's a great way to find the length of the hold. Some people like to use timers. I just like to count my breath. So once you're all settled, allow the spine to sink down, and we'll begin our counting of inhalations and exhalations. As you start to train the mind to let other things just meld into the background, sounds that aren't useful, thoughts that you don't really need to perseverate on right now. Feeling the sensation of breath traveling through the body. We're about at 5, maybe. Maybe you're breathing a little bit more quickly or slowly than I am. Allowing the body to become heavier and heavier. Feeling the props coming up to meet the body. Notice if there's any tension in the jaw or the features of the face. Start to become aware of the length of your breath, whether you're breathing an inhale or exhale longer, and just allow your attention to stay with being curious about the breath. So we're releasing judgment from how deep you're breathing, how quickly or slowly. And just starting to cultivate that curiosity and enjoyment of allowing the body to be still and soft. Starting to feel a little bit of internal stretch from these deep breaths, creating more space in the lungs. Maybe even starting to feel a little bit of expansion underneath the armpits, really allowing for the lungs to start to move to their fuller capacity. Stay for 3 more breaths here. Begin to contemplate moving out of this supported reclined position. So we'll end up just flat on the mat. Think about how you would like to come off of the props, if you want to bring the heels in or just walk the feet off, to what side you're going to do that. So you're creating a plan for how to transition. Keeping the transition between poses as part of the practice. Now, once you've formulated that plan, just go ahead and do it. Onto the back, and from here slowly extend the legs, bring the arms off to either side. Maybe look right and left and just start to feel the sensation of the spine where you are having some pressure on it. Begin to melt down into the floor. And you'll slide the heels towards the hips and roll off to one side. And we're going to draw the forearm underneath the shoulder. And you could stay with the knees bent. We're going to drop into the side waist and let the head drop down as well. So this kind of hanging out at the beach look here. Really thinking about the lower rib cage being pulled down. And if you're noticing that the shoulder's crunching up to the ear, maybe take the arm further away. Or if you have a prop close, whether it's the block or your bolster, you can bring that underneath the armpit. Sort of dropping down into the side waist and letting the head come towards the floor as well. Once you've got your arrangement from the torso up, you might want to play with extending the legs. If that does not feel right, if you're feeling like you're tipping off to one side or forward, then just keep the knees bent. So I'll look down and see that we're stacking the hips over one another. It's okay if one leg is out or behind you. And then we'll drop down here, feeling the side waist and that rib cage, those floating ribs as you inhale. And to press breath into that lower rib cage, feeling the compression at the top of the ribs, those top side. Feel free to drop the chin to the chest. Creating more space from the hip point up between the ribs. Nice passive opening for the neck. Four more breaths. We're only holding this for a little while. Notice a tendency maybe to fidget or want to move around. See if you can breathe in to the pose. That doesn't mean that if you're in pain to stay in the pain. You might have a little bit of discomfort. You're opening up. Take long, deep breaths. There go the distractions. Nope. And draw the knees towards you. You're going to press yourself up. And you're more than welcome to just roll off to your second side. I'm going to turn myself all the way around. I'm still staying facing you all as I work to keep the dogs from getting too overly excited. Go ahead and sit up on your second side. You're going to stay with me now. That forearm underneath the shoulder, dropping into the side waist. And second side can feel a little bit different than the first side, and that's fine. Thank you. Take your time, get the torso all set up from the belly button up, press down to the side waist, a little bit of length being created, and then decide how you'd like your top legs, whether knees bent, both knees, and settle in. Of course, sliding something underneath the armpit if you'd like. Look down to see that the hips are stacked. Stay here. Feeling the weight drop down, supported on the forearm. Notice if there's tension in the jaw, really try and let the jaw come away from the skull. Four more rounds of breath. more deep inhale and exhale. And slide yourself down and roll back onto your back. We'll be using the strap. If you'd like to, you can create a nice big loop with your strap. And take the time here to feel the whole spine flat on the mat. And that might mean that you want to shimmy the shoulders up, press into the back of the head, or move the hips for a moment. And you can always have a knee bend instead of extending through a leg as we draw the right knee into the chest. And then with your strap, if you have one, you'll loop the sole of the foot and reach up. Bend and straighten the leg a couple of times if you'd like to. And just notice if the hip is coming up, we want to press down. You might even take your thumb and press into the hip crease so that you can see that we've got a nice 90-degree angle rather than trying to get the thigh towards the chest. Feel free to point and flex the foot and settle in here. So over time, the weight feels like it's dropping more towards the tailbone than the low back. Sensation of the heel pressing up towards the ceiling. We're going to stay for another 3 breaths, a little bit longer. And search around in the body. Notice if there's contraction happening in the glutes or in the inner thighs. One more deep inhale and exhale. And let the leg come down, release the loop. And you could either extend the legs, or if it feels better, you can drop the knees towards one another or give a little sway in the hips. Moving on to the second side. We're counting to about 15 breaths. And it's important to take your time. Find what's right for your body right now. That means that the knee needs to be bent a little bit or the opposite leg extending. That's fine. And maybe the thumb to the hip crease pressing down so you can feel the whole sacrum. Left, right side, down on the ground. Allow yourself to settle back to the breath. So these holds quite a bit longer. Allow the body to melt down towards the ground. Just remember that if you do feel stagnation or it feels like there's kind of a intensity in a joint, maybe that's a wrist or the neck, it's just where you're building up a little bit, some energy or maybe even some kind of contraction happening. So you feel free to make those tiny little micro adjustments. Whether that's turning the leg in slightly or out slightly, or the foot in or out. So that we're assisting in moving that energy, the subtle energy, through the body, which is the goal of the practice. Finding that nice refreshing shift in the energies of the body. Just 2 more breaths. And then go ahead and let that left leg come down. We'll move the strap off to the side. Again, you might want to shift the hips or just let the knees come together. And we'll take a moment feeling the hips kind of flushing with new oxygenated blood. And we're going to move off to a seat. So however you'd like to get there, again deciding if you're rolling to one side or hugging the knees in, so using the transition as part of your practice. Pressing yourself up. You're more than welcome to take 2 blocks for the knees as we shift to Baddha Konasana. And in Baddha Konasana, with the bound ankle pose, soles of the feet together, I suggest kind of finding where you'd like to be, and then lifting the sits bones up and settling them back down. So sometimes when we come up and just sit, our sits bones are tucked under slightly, and you'll see that for me, one hip is a little bit different than the other one, so it naturally wants to come up. And today I'll use my blocks to support, and I'm going to press them back a little bit, so you'll see that the corner edge is actually right underneath, right behind the thigh. So I have a little bit more play here if I cap them forward on the calf, and you can notice that maybe for yourself, even though it's super supportive, it's also locking. So I want to allow some more movement for when I come forward. More than welcome to take your bolster and place it across as you forward fold. That can feel really nice underneath the armpits. If you do have a blanket, another option would be to roll the blankie up as you come forward. Now again, since you have the low half of the body maybe ready to go, folding forward. And as you come forward, see if you can rock forward rather than just curling in and folding in into the belly. See if you can rock forward. I like to place my elbows on my thighs. And then reaching the chest as if I would pull the chest through the gate of the arms. And from here, feel free to bend the elbows, capture the forehead, and settle into the pose. A little bit of pressure right in the middle of the forehead can even massage. It's really calming. And as you begin to turn physically more inwards, see if you can come back to the following of your inhales and exhales. Following the inhale, feeling the sensation of breath traveling from the nostrils into the lungs and back out. Keeping with the curiosity of the inhale, noticing how the body just shifts and changes on its own, how the shoulders want to rise and the back side of the body gets a little bit more expansive. Slowly maybe coming forward a little bit more, or if you have a tendency to want to push into a newer sensation, then practice coming back and backing off. Sometimes we have a tendency to want to move and get to something that we think is a little bit deeper or better or more flexible. And in our practice here, we're finding new spaces to explore in the body. And that might be that you're moving all the way back up, just letting the head drop down, putting a little bit of pressure. So if you're feeling like you want to shift and change, play with maybe backing off instead of pressing yourself forward. And we're about halfway through. Staying with this sensation of breath traveling through the body. Feeling the joy of breath. The expansion happening physically. Taking up space around you with the breath. Feeling the subtle energies flowing a little bit more efficiently. 2 more rounds of inhalation and exhalation. And again, now that we're in a transition back onto our backs. As you inhale, peeling the chest up. If you had that bolster, settle it off to the side. You can scoot your blocks to the side for a moment. We will use them again. Assist the knees closed. And I like to hold on to the backs of my legs and tuck my tailbone under. And you roll down. You're going to take one block, press into the soles of the feet, slide it underneath the low back, and then hug the knees into the chest and raise the soles of the feet up. You could also do this at a wall. So if you are wanting a little bit more time for your practice, I would encourage you at this point to shift to the wall. You could have a block underneath the low back if you'd like that. But we're only going to be here for another 5 breaths. If at all you're feeling pressure in the head or the face doing this, then you'd bend the knees. After this breath, bring the feet down, press into the floor to lift the hips. Draw the block out of the way. Again, if you just would like to shift to a longer reclined position, now's a great time to create a neutral body for Shavasana or corpse pose. Another option here would be to mindfully transition back to your seat and set yourself up for silent meditation, which could be, again, just following the breath for 10, 20, 30 rounds of breath. You could set a timer. If you're a person that kind of struggles with slumping forward and back, and you'd like to have a seated meditation afterwards, one practice that helps is to take a block. And just like we did at the top of class, we press the block, the back, and then scoot yourself back against a wall. And you could be seated on another block and you'd press your back into the wall to find your tall spine. And this is where I will leave you. Thank you so much for taking the time to practice. So you could go ahead and just place the hands on the heart space. Nice deep inhale through the nose and exhale through the mouth. Be well and safe and as kind as you can be, and know that you are loved. Thank you.